Hey, I am Jono Long with the Pro Church Marketing Podcast. Thanks for watching or listening, and I'm excited to talk with you today. Got a really cool guest that you're going to love hearing from, learning from, Tyler Harden at Firm Foundations Marketing, and is with us today. So it's going to be good stuff and lots of things to talk through. And yeah, so let's just jump right in. So how's everything going, Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Jono, thanks again for having me on, man. I appreciate it. It's good to hang out with you anytime I get a chance. So yeah, things are going well. So just to introduce myself a little bit. So you said I'm Tyler Harden, right? Foundations Marketing. I'm one of the co-founders. We're really a church growth consulting agency. So we've helped hundreds of churches, specifically ones that are plateaued, really find their focus to break through those growth barriers using research-based strategies. So we love us some community research. And so everything we do starts with understanding your church, your context, and really combining that marketing expertise with ministry experience to equip your leaders with proven strategies so you can reach more of the right people with the right methods and message.
Yeah, I love it. And when we were talking, we had some conversations before this, and just thinking in terms of the marketing, like what I do with ads, running Google ads and Facebook ads and building websites, like what the stuff that you guys do, really, not to make puns or sound like a dad here, but like it actually is a firm foundation,
Yeah.
and most people don't start with what you guys are doing. And we kind of, a lot of, like when I was on church staff, I think, we kind of struggle to connect with our surrounding community, but then still just kind of go with our gut and do the best we can. And so there's kind of a disconnect there. So like, what's up with that? And
Well, what you're saying totally resonates, right? Like it's so common in the church space to copy tactics from other churches or to follow best practices that might just not be applicable to your context. But it's like we're all trying to do our best, and that's what we think is the best. And oftentimes what I see is like by the time they come to us, it's because they've tried so many tactics, they've tried all the best practices, they've bought all the ads, paid all the agencies, and it's no knock on any of them. It's like they just started at the wrong spot. They didn't know who they were serving. They didn't know what they were going through and where they wanted to end up in life, what's going on in their spiritual walk. So they really couldn't speak intentionally. Those sort of best practice tactics ended up being just sort of generic white noise. And so what we find is like super helpful is really when you find your focus and identify your ideal audience as a church. And again, what are their pain points and how are they living their lives? What are they competing with? What is church competing with in their lives so that you can be more intentional in how you reach them, how you minister to them, those kinds of things. And we especially saw this huge disconnect, with the pandemic. I mean, so many churches come to us because they're like, man, our attendance dropped in half from COVID and now we're just kind of flatlining. But we know, it's been 5 years, right? And the church is like the only industry still talking about COVID for the most part.
yeah,
And trying to figure out how to re-engage people because there was such a huge falling off and trying to just sustain that now they're kind of stuck. And so the average church just doesn't know how to reach people. People more going on than ever before. There's more pulling on their schedule, and the church just hasn't been able to make that leap to bridge that connection again. They just don't know how to connect. And so that's where we really come in is to help them figure out, how do you become relevant again? How do you say the words that are going to get people to like lean in a little bit more, or what are the ministries that you need to establish?
So what are some of I'm sure you come across some of the same misconceptions probably repeatedly. And so what are some of the misconceptions churches are having about who they're actually reaching versus who they think they're reaching or they're trying to reach? Like what do you,
Yeah, absolutely.
kind of some common ones?
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to preface this by saying, I think churches are really doing the best that, they can.
Yeah.
They, of course, don't have, in most cases, don't have a marketing degree or communications background or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a fault of their own, but the solution isn't all that difficult either. And I think that's the good news here. So like one of the things we often hear is like churches saying, oh, we want to reach more young families, or we want to reach the unchurched or the D-church. And it's like the intent is right, like that's solid, but the aim is off. Like when we talk about young families, it's like, well, okay, well, who is that then? And it's like, they're already like, I just asked that basic question, right? And they're like, they've got kids. Like,
Yeah.
well, okay. Well, is a young family somebody in their late 30s, early 40s with 3 kids ranging from a teenager to a toddler? Is it a single mom? Like those scenarios are going to be completely different ways of living life and different challenges that they're dealing with. And so I really try to push on folks to like, let's dig a little bit deeper on who these people are and not just leave it at this sort of cutesy young family. And often when they say like young families, like the
That's pretty broad.
hidden meaning behind that is our church is old.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's almost a reactionary. Now you always want to be reaching the next generation. But more often than not, it's like all of a sudden like this urgency to reach young families. And so like, because they feel like that's the right thing to do, but they don't take the next step. And sometimes honestly, maybe it's not young families. Maybe it's that, again, that older family is your better next step. Like if your people are averaging 60, 70, 80 years old, maybe to get in a bunch of 25-year-olds isn't your best next step. Maybe it's 45, right? So sometimes figuring out what's the opportunity, who can you serve well within that demographic so that when they come, they feel like this is a place for me. They understand me. They can support me in the way I need.
Yeah, that made me think of a church that we've worked with, and great church, great people, solid, but they're in a community that had a higher, older median age. And so that was their thing. Hey, we want to reach younger families. We need to get some kids in here. We don't have any younger families. Our median age is like 67. And so, they kind of want to start like running ads about, getting these young families with little kids. And when really probably like you said, and we had that conversation with them, maybe we need to go after 40 and 50 somethings for a minute, because as we're running ads and then they're coming to the website and going to Facebook and seeing that every event, and this is just who they are, but every event is senior adults, that young families are just going to see that and be like, I don't know. It doesn't look like we would fit in there.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Well, and likewise, when you talk about like the unchurched folks, like that's not just like a category on a survey, right? Like there's not somebody walking around just with an unchurched t-shirt.
Right.
Yeah, for some reason, that's how churches target them. Like, and it's like, but they're not thinking of themselves that way. So if you're gonna reach them, you have to know them, right? You have to have conversations with them. You have to know, again, what they're struggling with, what their pain points are, what are those spiritual questions they're asking, so that you can provide those answers and solutions and come alongside them and guide them in that journey. But if you just stay surface level, one of the things, I'm going to jump maybe a little bit off topic a little here, but one of the things I see so often is people saying, man, why should we have a church? Or why should our church have a target audience, right? The church is for everyone. Jesus is for everybody. And like, yes, Jesus is for everyone, but your church is not, right? Like that's the differentiation. And
I was going to ask, like, what do you say to the pastor who is just like, look, we're just trying to reach our community. Everybody's welcome. We want to reach everybody. We're going to preach the word. We're going to worship Jesus, and everybody come on.
Yeah. And again, well-intended, but the reality of how humans operate is when you say we're trying to reach everyone, you reach no one. You have a generic message. You have offerings that you're not, I don't mean money offerings, right? you have services, ministries, outreaches that aren't relevant because you're spreading yourself out way too thin, right? You're burning money in every direction. All your staff is working around the clock. I mean, it's just, it's awful. And I think some of the mindset of like the target audience is wrong thing really stems out of like, like, oh, if we focus on families, then that means we don't care about senior adults. Or if we focus on, different ethnicity, that means we don't care about this one. Or, and it's like, no, that's not it. And really what we go to the community research, what we're looking at is not those superficial things that we're all checking off the boxes on in our own head, like skin color, ethnicity, or any of those things. It's really the cultural things that are bringing your church together, the priorities that are naturally attracting people, right? Like there's a reason why so many churches have people that are 80 and there's people all the way down to people that are, 8 months old, right? Like there's something that's bringing them together, and it's not because you're a white church or a rich church or, it's because of these deeper things. And we don't naturally, especially outside of the marketing world, we don't naturally think about those things that actually draw us to a group of people or an organization, but they do influence our decisions. And so that's where we focus our energy on helping the church to identify what those things are and who's attracted to who they are.
So that's cool. And I appreciate what you said a minute ago, that like, it's not really any fault of their own. Cause I'm always careful to, I was on church staff for 20 years. And I remember when church marketing was kind of becoming a thing, all I ever heard on the blogs and the podcast was just how much church staff sucked at marketing. And it was always condescending. And even now there's, sometimes you see this sometimes you see church marketers like us maybe kind of talking down to like, man, I'm so, gosh, pastors, why do you keep doing this? And that's helping no one. So I don't want anyone to hear us, being critical. That's why I appreciate what you said. It's like, they're not thinking about this all day.
Yep.
They don't teach classes on this in seminary or Bible college. This is not natural, but but once you start thinking about it and you've heard like, okay, my community, there's a chance my community is not exactly like I think it is.
Yep.
And I think especially like, I'm down here in east of Atlanta. I'm in the Bible Belt and I'm kind of in right outside the suburbs, kind of a little bit rural, a little bit suburban, and all the churches do look alike. And if I was a church planner, I would think I would be just as vague as some of the people that you're describing. And I'm sure there's a really good chance that I'd be wrong about some things. And unless I thought about it or somebody told me. So I'm curious, like, what's an example? And I may be jumping ahead, but what's an example of something that you've discovered that really changed? It was just significant enough to make a church need to really reevaluate a lot of what they were doing or some major ways. Am I making sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind is so many times pastors, church leaders just don't know what they don't know, right? Back to it's no fault of their own, but they don't even have a scope of how many thousands of people are living around them, much less which hundreds or thousands they're best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve.
Yeah.
Right. So I think sometimes just coming at it from an objective standpoint by using community research really can be eye-opening to the opportunity. I think sometimes they think like, oh, my church is small, we're old, like, especially if they're in that plateau or they've been in an extended decline, like it kind of messes with their mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this reorients them to the reality of the opportunity that there is to share the gospel in their community. One thing that I think is also important is, what brought people in isn't necessarily what will keep them, as far as like why people might come to church or something like that. So, because again, back to best practices, we see so many people right now running Facebook ads, Google ads, no knock on any of those things. They're amazing. You do them, Jono, and I'm sure you do them great.
Yeah. Of course we do.
But if you're not showing your culture and your authenticity through those, what you're going to end up seeing is a bunch of people that come through the doors and then don't come back. And it's not because you did something wrong. It's because you didn't clarify the expectation up front, right? You weren't clear who you were. You weren't clear that you understood them. So there's this disconnect that they don't realize exists until they experience your church. And so I think authenticity over everything is really kind of what has stood out to me after, 7 years of doing this and working with hundreds of churches of all sizes and kinds. It's just being true to yourself. And I don't mean that to the extreme of like, we don't want to fall into that, the way we've always done it sort of mindset.
Yeah.
But most of communities are large enough that you don't have to become a totally different animal to effectively reach them. You just have to become more intentional about engaging them.
Yeah. Yeah. You've talked about like healthy growth. And I think sometimes maybe we just get into, I did this. I've done this in business. I've done it when I was a youth pastor. It's just like, hey, we just want to grow. We just want to reach as many people. But I've heard you mention healthy growth a few times. Yeah. And so what is healthy growth versus just, hey, we're reaching our community?
Yeah. So, I think it's, as church leaders, you have a responsibility to nurture and steward those people well, right? It's not just the church budget that you have to steward. It's the souls, it's the lives. And so healthy growth, might not look like rapid growth, right? Like when I hear some folks say like, our church grew by X amount of hundreds or thousands in this really short period of time, my first concern is, did they have the systems in place to welcome them well? Did they just have a big Sunday? Are they falling through the cracks a few months down the road? So many churches just don't put the time into creating those systems and building those systems and having a good assimilation process so that they actually become part of the body of Christ, right, and not just a Sunday morning visitor. So healthy growth to me is very much intentionality. It's assimilation. There's a balance of all things. There's a place for all the different aspects, but it's connection and conversation with your community really is where healthy growth stems out of. And yeah, just being intentional in those conversations is what I think really comes down to, so that you can serve them well. I know I've been on the flip side of being invisible at times, and I know there's people in the community that have experienced that as well, and it's not a
Yeah.
good feeling. And so I think it's our obligation as church members, church leaders, pastors, to make sure that when we are pursuing growth, we're pursuing it with the right heart, we're pursuing it prayerfully, and remembering that there are real people and real souls involved in the process.
So I want to back up for a second, back to the authenticity and really presenting yourself as who you are, and being true to yourself, like you were mentioning. So when a church does try to market themselves, and I say market with quotation, air quotes there, because I don't know about you, I catch a lot of flack from pastors, mainly on my Facebook ads, just like making comments like, we don't need to
Yeah,
market the church, we just need to preach the word.
just preach the gospel, man. Yeah.
Well, hey, no one said you shouldn't. I'm saying let's do both. But, I don't know that the Sunday morning worship service was necessarily designed to be the evangelism arm of the church. I think people are supposed to go out and invite their friends and bring them back to be
For the
disciples.
equipping of the saints, I believe
I
somebody once
think
said, right?
that's how it worked. And so this is just one little tool in the tool bag,
Yeah.
running some ads. And anyway, I digress. But if a church is like, hey, we want to market ourselves, and we're okay with the term marketing because we know that just means, getting our message out, reaching more people, it can still feel awkward. It still feels a little, I think some guys feel a little icky. And I even try not to use the word marketing as much anymore, just because, just to reduce, friction. But what are some ways that they can make sure that they're being authentic? Is it making sure they use pictures of their people in ads? And, if you don't have any young families, just don't have a bunch of pictures of young families in ads. But, we don't want to scare them off by only showing senior adults in the ads.
Yeah.
Is it our website? What are some practical things that we can do to market ourselves, but no bait and switch,
Yep.
but still compel people to and grab their attention?
Yeah. So awesome. I love that example that you gave. So, I really believe that every church is designed for a purpose and a people, right? So it's, when it comes to authenticity, especially in your marketing efforts, we're not trying to sell people, trick people. And I think this is really just a paradigm shift, a mindset shift for folks. Is, again, your church is needed. It does not matter if you're traditional or old or small, I talked to a church in Massachusetts that's a client of ours, and when we first had, this sort of the initial discovery calls and stuff, they were talking about like, we're just a small church. We've got a bunch of, we're surrounded by big churches. And I'm like, well, tell me more about that. And like, there's 4 of them, right? Because we're in Massachusetts. So it's the opposite of the Bible Belt. I'm like, 4. I'm like, I could probably throw a rock to 4 here in Virginia, but
Yeah.
but for them, like, they're like this detriment mindset, right? Of, I'm just a small church. There's all these big churches. They're attracting all the families, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, there are people that need your small church. There are people that want to be seen and known in a small church. So don't run away from who you are. You need to amplify who you are. And once we started having more conversations and digging deeper, they're like, yeah, there's people that actually have joined our church and become part of the body because they did the big church thing and realized that wasn't what they wanted. Well, right now, the big church thing was the only message anybody was hearing in your community.
Yeah.
So we need to let them know that you love them, you care for them, you love messy people, right? The drug addicts, the alcoholics, the broken families. Like, you are equipped to minister to them, to serve them, to welcome them well, and to know them and do life with them.
Yeah.
But they're not hearing that message from you, right? So, and that's really, again, embracing who you are. So when it comes to the website, you mentioned photos, which is huge on a website. I think the first step is really figuring out, okay, if this is who we are today and we want to go in a different direction, if we want to start growing younger, first of all, book Growing Young is fantastic. If anybody wants to check that out, by the Fuller Youth Institute, amazing book, super practical. But have a plan to start, like, how, if we want to minister to other generations, if they come in, what are we going to do with them? Right? Be thinking about those things ahead of time. Don't just start throwing young people pictures on the website to get them in the door and have nothing, no plan to serve them once they're there. One of the things I see churches struggle with sometimes is like, well, we have no kids, we want kids, but the kids won't stay because we don't have a kids program, but we don't want to spend the money investing in the kids program because there's no great cart before the horse.
Yeah.
And so what I really encourage people is like, well, what's the step you can do now, right? Think outside of the box. There's no perfect way of doing children's ministry. So what can you do now? that shows you're
Mhm.
expecting families, you're expecting kids, you plan for them, you love them, and you want to minister to them. What can you do within those bounds that doesn't require a big staff or a bunch of volunteers? Like, how can you start? And then how do you communicate what that is? So that's not a disappointment, it's an expectation, right? Like if children are part of the worship service, if they're sitting in the sanctuary with parents,
Yeah.
don't make that sound like it's the default because we don't have anything. Make it the
Right.
plan because we believe in intergenerational ministry
Yeah.
and Jesus loved children and we want children and their squeals and wiggles to be a part of our ministry.
Yeah, that was it reminded there was a church that we've worked with a few times and sweet people out in the Midwest, but a church that was in decline and had some fresh leadership and so approached us about doing some ads, and so we did Facebook ads, and I kind of debated, like I was like, man, I don't know if this is going to work for them. I don't really know if I should be taking their money, but this is, in some ways, they felt like this is kind of our last shot. We don't, there's not much else for us to try. And I was like, okay, well, let's do it. Well, man, people started showing up, and this was a very liturgical church. And so, I want to make 2 points. One is that they were a little kind of embarrassed of how old school and liturgical they were. And I had to remind them, I was like,
Yeah.
look, there are people in your community that want that aren't looking for a rock band experience on Sunday morning. They want it to feel churchy. That's cool. I have tons of former students that from when I was a youth pastor who are going to Anglican churches and Episcopalian churches just because these gosh, what are they? I guess I don't know if they're millennials, I guess, and there's some of them just wanting a high church experience. So, but and so it started working, and they had families bring in their kids, and they called me and wanted to set up a meeting, and they said, hey, Jono, this is working, and families are showing up with their kids, but they're not coming back. I said, well, did you ask them why they're not, and they said, well, because we don't have anything for their kids. I said, well, do something for the kids. And again, it didn't occur to them, and they were older and they were tired, but they were like, well, we don't want to prepare and then no one show up. I said, look, prepare a lesson, and you may go 3 weeks sitting on that lesson, but stand out in the lobby ready to take the kid by hand in case they do show up.
Yep.
And use that lesson. And so you may not need to prepare a new one every week, but do something because people want their kids to have something.
I think sometimes, again, it's just giving those church leaders permission to do something different. Like, I think there's just this pressure that's sort of unspoken that it has to be this way or no way. Yeah. And it just doesn't have to be that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what about the smaller rural church, like the one I described, and like some of the ones you've worked with who think, oh yeah, we're just in decline. How they typically don't have a huge tech team. There's not somebody there that's thinking about, hey, let's do a demographic study of our community. And what encouragement would you give to them? What can they do? What are some tools they could use, or what should they do?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say, so we've worked with those types of churches. We worked with a church of 30 people in rural Pennsylvania, where the youngest person is in their 50s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like eye-opening when we went through the process with them. So I think, one thing I want to point out is when we do community research and we identify your ideal audiences and the people that your church is best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve within your community, is it should feel familiar in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Because these are people that are already statistically likely to connect with the way you do some certain things, like the way you do church, or what you prioritize as your mission, or your teaching styles. There's all these different elements that go into it. And so with it being already familiar, it's less about, stats and numbers. Like, we try to make it pretty warm and fuzzy and a little bit more marketing friendly than like, here's a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on a practical level, like, let's say you can't, you can't bring in a consultant, you can't purchase community research or any of those kinds of things. Like, one of the best starting points just to get like the average church to start thinking in the right direction is something that I've used a lot of times with churches. It's called the 5 Ps of church target audience. Not a fancy name, but it is just what it is. 5 Ps. And so if a church goes through these 5 areas, and I'll list them in a moment, it starts to paint a much more vibrant picture of who it is that they are actually reaching and reaching well. It's sort of like, here are the questions to ask in a sense. And it creates a better word picture than, young families or unchurched. And so I'll try to rattle those off real quick for you. But so people is the first one. So this is like that basic top level demographic answer that people might say. So it might be people in their 30s, young families, married couple, blue collar worker, whatever, right? Just that basic sort of high level thing. Place, geography, where are they coming from? So many times when we talk about target audience, churches completely forget to think about where they live and where they come from. Yeah. And it's like, well, where are you going to run your ads? Like, or I hear like, oh, well, we have somebody that drives from 45 minutes away. Like, okay, time out.
Have you had churches pretty like surprised to figure out where their people were actually coming from or how people were finding them?
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I could probably spend a whole podcast episode just talking about this because there's like a thing I call the church donut, which a lot of times you had the community started, or the church congregants started living near the church and then moved out to the suburbs. So all of their, huge portion of their congregation lives nowhere near the church, which then makes it hard to invite neighbors in because they're not as committed to driving the distance. Whole thing. But so many times they don't think about that geography. It's like, is it a 5-mile radius? Is it a 10-minute drive? Is it the county? That's going to vary church to church and context to context. But if you don't start with defining it, again, you're going to be running ads all over the place trying to reach them, or you won't know where to host your outreach events, right? You're just going to go all over them. So, and the next P is passions, really. So what are these people interested in? What really amps them up? Do they love making a difference in their community, right? Especially young generations, 20 somethings, like they love having an impact and serving. Are they chasing careers? Like what are the, is it their kids, right? A lot of parents, young families, like we love our kids. So, what are those passions? The next one is pain points. What are they struggling with, right? A lot of things in the church that we teach and in the Bible can be solved when we really spend time in diving in the word. But if we don't know what their struggles are, we can't create a plan to help them. And so identifying some of those struggles. And the thing is most of the time, the church leaders know some of these things. They just don't have a structure for drawing it out to sort of paint this picture. And then pursuits is the last one. So really, like, what are those aspirations of that person you're trying to reach? Again, are they trying to move up the corporate ladder? What is it? And so when you put all these things together, you have a good starting point that doesn't cost you any money unless you decide to take some folks out to coffee.
Yeah.
But that's a great free place to start to begin to paint that picture. Of course, we have community research based solutions that are all data driven, that go much deeper in a lot of these categories and more. But that's a great place to start.
Very cool. So is there an example of a church that you've worked with who really kind of, turned it around, not because they had a ton of money, not because of a big budget, but just because of getting really clear on some of these things that we're talking about, getting really clear on who they're trying to reach, who they are, and what has not been working, what could work, trying some new things. Like, what have you seen?
What I think is interesting is in a lot of ways, we see the same symptoms regardless of the church, right? Yeah. So it might be that 30-person aging church that's in decline and facing closing its doors. But we have seen them experience the same symptoms as a church with all the money in the world, 1,000+ people, huge facilities, tons of families. And so, but the commonality is again, they don't know who they were reaching. So like with that big church that I mentioned, for example, I know you were talking about like maybe, small budget, no budget, that kind of thing, but they had all the budget and they still couldn't solve the problem because they were trying to solve the wrong problem. They didn't know who their audiences were, what they needed to hear, even their communications methods. I mean, that comes through our community research thing as well, as like, where do you even need to be spending your efforts on your messaging? Like this might shock some people, but social media isn't the answer for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, we all have it, but that doesn't mean it's our preferred communication method. It might be our zone out at the end of the day method, right? Like there's different ways to use the different technologies and opportunities to communicate. So I think that, again, when you build that firm foundation, when you know who your ideal audience is, what they need to hear from you, and and communicating well how you can serve them, it really makes all the difference, regardless of size, regardless of budget, but it makes everything you do that much better. Again, so many churches that come to us spent all the money, thousands of dollars on websites, thousands of dollars of ads, and got nowhere. And it was because they didn't start with the most vital piece that makes all of that other stuff way more successful.
Right. So you mentioned yeah, social media may not be the best communication method. So you would say a change that a church may need to make is like, look, you're not texting anyone. You need to start
Yeah.
texting people. Quit putting a Facebook post out there because only 10% of your followers are seeing it anyway.
Yep.
Any other changes like that you think like that you've seen people make that
Man,
were
that one,
good
I mean, that one is such a good example. And unfortunately, I've lived that myself as a church member.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have been begging for an email or text message because instead it's just like paper handouts that I don't want to keep track of, or it's an
Yeah.
occasional Facebook post that the algorithm decides to show me a week after the fact, like at all.
Right. Right.
And it's really challenging to stay connected. But yeah, I think sort of to your point that we've seen older churches be like, oh, well, we're supposed to be texting. So let's go get a texting platform and let's do that. And it's like, no, there's nothing that you're supposed to do for the most part, right? Like,
Right.
look at what your people need, look at where your resources is, what your context is, and where you can start. Don't start importing. And that, I mean, that's just temptation. That's just going to burn you out, burn your dollars, have no time and volunteers left, and make no progress.
Right.
So that's where that research really can provide insight and kind of put some blinders on some things for at least for right now, and for those immediate steps to start growing in the right direction and communicating in the right places.
Nice. So yeah. So last question. I know we got to land the plane here, but just and you hit on this a minute ago, and so that maybe I may be asking you to repeat something you've already said, but just that the pastor who's listening to this or who's just struggling feels like they're doing everything right. They're doing everything they know to do, and they're like, okay, actually, yeah, I don't really know all that much about my community. Maybe they're bivocational. Maybe they don't have a ton of time to devote to this. What is something practical that first step, that next step would be for them just to make a move, to take a step in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm gonna keep banging the same drum on community research. But first of all, reach out to us at firmfoundationsmarketing.com.
Yeah, definitely check out Firm Foundations. And yeah, I mean, is it simple as because I'm thinking like, man, do I go down to the county courthouse and get just get some public request records, or is this doing a survey?
So
Start knocking on
there
doors?
are some free sources, right? Like there's the U.S. Census data, and they're okay. I mean, if that's your best step, that's where you can start. By all means, it's better than doing nothing.
Yeah.
I would encourage you again, just start having conversations with people. I mean, I gave you those 5 P's a little bit ago. Start
Yeah.
asking those questions. Start writing it down. Go to your community leaders, teachers, principals. City council.
Yeah.
They'll provide a whole lot of insight and knowledge into what's going on in the community. Now, our focus again is really more on your ideal audience. So it's not the community at large, but that would at least give you a step in the right direction to get to know who your community is and see where you can meet those needs. I mean, I see so many churches that do a lot of good things, but they don't know how to identify the great things. So again, they just, I talked to a church yesterday, actually, and I was like, we have this ministry, that ministry, we do this outreach, that one, like these are all great things done in Jesus' name. Don't misunderstand me.
Mm-hmm.
But the church is not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be around to continue to make an impact.
Yeah.
Because they're pouring themselves out into too many different cups.
Right.
And so
instead of doing a few things really excellent, just doing a lot of stuff okay.
So I mean, I would encourage leaders to experiment. I think again, we need permission to fail sometimes, to test some things and try some things and fail. But I don't think that they always feel comfortable doing that. So
I remember one of the most freeing things I heard. I think it was Craig Groeschel at a conference he said he uses a phrase all the time: everything's an experiment. And I'm like, when you go into trying something new with the mindset that it's an experiment, it may work, it may not, and we're not all going to be humiliated if it doesn't. It was an experiment. So you got to try some stuff.
Yeah, do it for a season and see what kind of traction you get. So I was talking to a church yesterday. They were a Methodist church, and similar situation we talked about a few minutes ago with no kids, but cart before the horse, whatever. And I was like, well, you've got some, and let's look at your ideal audiences. Okay, they're on the older end. They're in the 40s to 50s range, and that would still be a win. That would make the church younger if they started getting more of those. So we're talking about kids that are probably middle school and up. Mm-hmm. But okay, let's put a date on the calendar to have a plan for the entire summer for kids that age that are all about building relationship. Like there's ministry opportunities, there's outreach in there as well. But like sometimes it's like, man, we're just going to have pizza and dodgeball, right? Like building relationships on a consistent basis during the summer. Some kids won't be able to be there because they're on vacation and whatever, but like, there's stuff there's time. So let's use the 2 or 3 months of summertime to
Yeah.
begin to build relationships, start sowing seeds into the community, make some of those opportunities so easy to come to that they're inviting their friends. And now when fall comes around and you have sort of your big fall kickoff for ministry all over again, it's not the first time they've heard of you.
Right. Right.
And some of those events, it's not a big investment, right? Like buying some pizza or getting some dodgeballs or water balloons or what squirt guns,
Yeah.
like it's not expensive, right? It's just
Yeah.
intentional.
Right.
And so I think that's maybe my biggest encouragement out of all of it is to just be intentional. Look around, like if we had to say no to some things so that we could say yes to a few more, what would that look like? And start
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to know who your community is if you get out in it.
Yep.
And just I know my temptation is like, man, I want to go to the grocery store and hopefully I don't run into anybody I know. And we're out on date night. Hopefully I don't see. I'm terrible about that. But the truth is, yeah, if I want to know my community, I've got to get outside my bubble. And
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned teachers. I didn't think about that, but I'm like, once you said it, I'm like, yeah, teachers they know everything that's going on because they deal with the real. They
Yeah.
deal with the real stuff. I
I
remember.
mean, they know, how messy the households are, like not literally messy, but like
Right.
parents aren't involved, or hey,
Yeah.
this kid gets free lunch all the time, or they have one pair of shoes, or I mean,
Yeah.
they're so much closer to some of those things. And I think when we can connect and serve them first, I mean, I think that's the thing is I think we a lot of times default to what can we get out of people,
Right.
and we need to start how can we give and build those relationships over time, and
Right.
not try to rush it, because again, we want to be authentic, we do genuinely care, but sometimes in our eagerness we kind of jump that step. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're exactly right, man. Well, that's super helpful, and I think some pastors would definitely be encouraged by that. And it's not quite as overwhelming as you would think, and there's some easy steps to take to start. So if anybody wants to find you, how do they do that?
yeah, so they can always find me on social. It's Tyler D. Harden is my handle on all the major social media platforms, or firmfoundationsmarketing.com. And we do the community research, ideal audience stuff as a singular solution. So you can come do that with us, and then make your ads with Jono a whole lot more effective and more intentional when you put the message out there into the community.
Yeah, man, that would be awesome to have that done before we do ads. I'm just thinking like how much more we could tune in those ads to
Yeah.
what the community really needs, rather than just saying, "Hey, come to church." We could, man, if you got a drug problem in town, then we maybe can do some ads for Narcotics Anonymous or something, and
Yeah.
man, I wish every church would do that, because that would definitely make the ads more effective.
It's a small, in my opinion, it's a small investment that really impacts every area of your ministry. Because this isn't something that just makes your marketing better. It makes your missional work better. It makes your preaching on Sundays more tuned in, right? It hits all of those areas so that you can serve your community well, and with purpose, and with the confidence that it is data backing up these decisions, not just a gut
Yeah.
feeling or a roll of the dice.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. It's going to keep you relevant. It's going to keep
Yep,
you from becoming irrelevant. That's so good, man.
absolutely.
Well, I appreciate your work, appreciate your ministry, and thanks so much for hanging out. This has
Yeah.
been awesome. And so everybody, if you're watching or listening, what is it they say? Hit the smash that subscribe button. Whatever, just do whatever you need to do to get alerts, and because every week trying to put out information that's valuable, that'll help you reach your community with the gospel. That's what we're all about here. And so thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll talk soon.